Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name.
Thanks again for tuning in to Armor of God. Thanks so much for taking a little bit of your time to be here with us, so hopefully all of you are going to learn a lot from this compilation as well. Now, in the previous two videos, I've shared with you a lot of clips, and I mean a lot of clips on the evil spirits, especially the never before done on this channel, the 4-hour Zoom session with Father Winston, the exorcist from the Philippines. If you have questions about demonic infestation at home, how to get rid of the evil spirits when your house is haunted, or on the incubus and succubus demons, evil eye, the third eye, why people do blood offerings, haunted hotel, real exorcism cases, and so many more. If you have the time, please watch the video. You're going to learn a lot there. But for this one, on the other hand, I thought we'd take a break from all that talk on demons, and let me share you several clips of Father Joseph Iannuzzi instead. Here's the table of content, as per usual, for your reference. And without wasting any more time, let's start with the first one.
Scrupulosity is an epidemic. The little flower, Sainte Thérèse de Lisieux, said that she suffered from this when she was young. And basically, it is a condition where the soul doesn't rely upon God's mercy in particular, devolves into a sort of obsession with its own control over itself. What do I mean by that? It's not the person's fault. I want to make this clear. It's beyond the person's ability to control. It's a compulsive behavior related to religious and moral issues, in particular sin. So let's suppose, like most of us can easily do, I committed something bad. I've committed a sin, I've committed an infraction, a moral transgression, and the devil brings us back to my memory, which he likes to do, to drive us away from God's mercy. And we entertain these thoughts that we have no control over. Why do I say we have no control over them? Because we did not put them there. Satan can enter the will and the intellect without our consent. He does it all the time. But it's up to us, once we're aware that this is not our thought, to do our best to fight it. Doesn't mean we will eradicate it just with the sheer act of a fiat. It means that we have to exercise repeatedly trust in God's mercy through prayer and through, the daily requirements of the church, the frequenting of the sacraments of confession, at least once a month, communion weekly, at least weekly, meditation, prayer, holy mortification, etc. So these scrupulous moments consist of persistent doubts that these transgressions, sins, moral infractions I've committed cannot be done away with, or that my effort is not good enough for God. And therefore, I'm always questioning myself and my status quo, my spiritual state right now. It's not pleasing to God. I'm never pleasing to God. No matter what I do, it doesn't meet the mark. It's not going to be happy. It's not going to meet happiness in God's eyes. So the person lives in doubt, insecurity, fear, and lack of trust in God's mercy. The little flower, Sainte Thérèse de Lisieux, suffered from this a lot. I suffered from this when I was a seminarian. And it's hard to identify because you don't know what it is unless someone, like I'm with you now, explaining it to you. No one sat down and said, look, Joe, this is what scrupulosity is. Avoid it in the religious life. Nobody told me that. I underwent it not knowing I was experiencing this when I was a seminarian. And what you do is, first and foremost, inform your mind with sound spiritual truths that come from the church. Now, that's the first part. That's not good enough. You have to then believe in those truths completely, not half-heartedly. And I hate to say this, but this is where a lot of the conservative individuals, that is, people who always question church teaching, I'm not using the word conservative in a bad sense here. Therefore, I should say ultra-conservative people that question the church's teaching, question the Pope's teaching, they question everything the church says. These people are the ones who suffer more of scrupulosity than others. These ultra-conservatives, because they do not trust anything. So they have to take everything in their own hands, say, I will decide whether it's pleasing to God or not. Now, when you do that, you know how it ends up? Nothing will ever be pleasing to God because it's in your hands. That's the problem. It's in your hands and you're imperfect. So you who are imperfect are trying to make something perfect. It's impossible. So you have to commit yourself blindly to a higher authority. So I'm not saying just blindly obey everything that comes from every church authority, because there are conflicting messages given by different churches of church authority. Some are in schism, some are in communion with Rome, some are straddling between the two, and they move 1 week to the left, 1 week to the right. You can't trust these people. Either you're completely committed to God and his church or you're not. There's no in between. And this is where scrupulosity is born, from this wavering between, right, what the church teaches, what I think. And they follow what feeds scrupulosity are these blogs that attack the Vatican and the Pope, and they believe them. This only feeds scrupulosity even more. But again, the person, him or herself, initially is not to be blamed for these scrupulous thoughts, because they want to please God. You see, the effort is genuine behind it. They're erring on the side of caution. I do not want to assume anything I do is good unless I'm completely certain. This way, I'm not assuming anything with God, and that's okay. But after the church teaches you something, after the church makes it a doctrine, and then you still persist, now it becomes your fault. Now it becomes your fault. Before you didn't know, now you know. And this is what separates the good conservatives from the bad ultra-conservatives who do not want to walk side by side with the church and its moral teachings. Again, scrupulosity regards religious and moral obsessions. Doctrines they don't want to accept, codes of conduct they do not want to abide by, etc. And here's a good thing to help ease the transition from scrupulosity to normalcy in the spiritual world. When you are told to do something by the church and you don't agree with it, and the church teaches that this is doctrine, once you accept that, even if you don't agree with it, you're no longer responsible for what you do in accepting that. The church takes the responsibility off your shoulders once you consent to the church. That's a beautiful thought. That means God will not hold you responsible anymore. Discipline changes, but not doctrine. So when the church teaches a doctrine and we resist it, we're not just resisting our confessor, we're resisting all confessors in union with the Pope, in union with Rome. And therefore, the quick way to get rid of scrupulosity is to understand that once you do what the church asks, even if it's against your opinion, God will not hold you responsible for that.
For the second clip, I'd like to share this one on how we can increase the number of souls that will be saved in the end, essentially making us co-redeemers with Christ. Listen to this.
But with respect to the final battle, the book of Revelation has been written, meaning it's already in stone, so to speak. It's already done. We know who's going to win. We know what's going to happen because God has foreseen it all. You see, with God, there is no time, no space. He foresees all things before they exist. In that sense, it's done within God's eternal mind's eye. In real time and space, it's not done. It has to be carried out. And there are many variables, I think, that can influence the result, or I should say the course leading to the result, but the result will always be the same, and that is that God will remain victorious. Certainly we can increase the souls that will be saved in the end. That result we can change. Or we can increase the souls that will be damned in the end according to our lack of cooperation with God's will. Everyone co-redeems with Christ in the sense that we can save souls and influence the end result. Even though God, we know, wins in the end, the amount of souls that God will take in his sweep depends 100% upon us. So our yes, our fiat, our cooperation with his grace determines a lot when it comes to the salvation or the damnation of many souls. Now, all of us have missed the mark in life to some extent, unless we were purified in the womb like John the Baptist and Joseph, who never sinned in their life, or like Mary, who was conceived without sin and never sinned in her life. But most of us are conceived and we sin, and we learn by trial and error. We learn fire is bad by burning our fingers with matches. So in that sense, none of us will render a perfect accounting to God and say, I was responsible for co-redeeming and saving all these souls. I didn't miss a soul. But what we can do is go back in the divine will in time by applying our acts today to the past, to the present, to the future, and ransom or redeem those acts in our own life we fail to do according to God's will, or we that impacted others negatively. I don't get tired of saying this about Padre Pio. And Padre Pio said that when he was asked if his prayers impacted his, I think it was his grandfather, great grandfather, he said, I'm trying to remember verbatim his words. He said, The Lord has taken everything into account because with God, everything is in the eternal present. And those prayers, he said, for the soul of my great-grandfather who died before I knew him, had already been taken into account so that even now I can pray for a happy death for my great-grandfather's soul. Even now, I can pray for a happy death of my great-grandfather's soul. This is what we can do when we are engaged in this final battle. We know it's going to happen in the future in real time, but in God's mind, it's already done. So as to take within our lifetime many souls with us so that in the end they're saved. We can go back in time and apply our prayers now to the souls that have already died, that we've known in life, that we haven't had a chance to pray for example, and impact their contrition before they die, dispose them for the act of forgiveness before they die, and so forth.
The next clip is quite short, but I like it whenever Father Iannuzzi shares something like this. And this one is on St. Pope John Paul II. Listen to this.
Pope John Paul II, when I participated in his Mass in the private chapel in Italy, I was a seminarian at the time. He had, after the Mass, he would go to his pew. So basically, there were two series of pews. Like, it was a small chapel, maybe 10 pews, just enough for maybe 40, 50 people. And he said the Mass, and in between and in front of both series of pews was his kneeler, his prière-dieu, where he knelt down and prayed before Mass and after Mass. So we would see him from the back. He was right before the altar. He would get up, vest, celebrate Mass, come back, kneel down before that prière-dieu for a good 10 minutes or so, sometimes longer. And then he would come and go into the hall where they shuffled us and greet us all, give us a rosary. And when he left, when everyone went into the hall, I peeked. I wanted to look at his pew. And I saw on top of the pew, he had all these intentions written down of different people, different, like the war, Russia, or let's say Afghanistan, United States. I think it was the United States, Italy, United States. I'm kidding. But he had all these intentions. And I saw that he did this sort of like unilateral approach, like one by one. And that's okay to do. We can say, I want to focus on this intention. And anyway, we can do that. You can do that if you're praying for one priest and all priests at the same time. The emphasis could be on one priest, but also say, I offer this for all priests, but especially for this. Like when I do Mass, priests do Mass, I think this way as well. There's a special intention. Someone will say, offer this Mass up for me, and they go, give a Mass type. But does that mean the Mass is only for them? Of course not. It's for everybody. But in a special way, it's for them because they've given a contribution and they want a special intention for the priest to focus in a special way with his intention on that, while generally focusing on everyone else. So there's the particular intention and the general intention.
And here's another one on us co-redeeming with Christ. Listen to this.
So in the work of redemption, Christ provided every human being of the past, present, future with everything necessary to be holy and saved. That's called redemption. That's not called salvation, it's called redemption. Salvation is actualized when we cooperate with the graces of redemption. So the first key is the key of redemption. The second key is the key of salvation. So when we cooperate with Christ's redemptive work and the graces that he provides us with, that he purchased, we ascend to salvation. There is no salvation without consenting to the grace of redemption. St. Paul says it, that I fill up in my own flesh the sufferings that are lacking to the body of Christ, to the passion of Christ for the sake of his body, the church. What is lacking to Christ's passion? Didn't he do everything? So then why would St. Paul say, I am filling up in my own flesh the sufferings that are lacking to the passion of Christ? We add to that treasure trove of grace that Christ has acquired once and for all, that constitutes the one public revelation of Christ. Certainly the church teaches in Article 66 of the Catechism that nothing can be added to this one public revelation. That's revelation, not passion. There's a difference. The revelation is constituted once and for all with Christ. Nothing can be added to it. But we can participate in and add to the graces of his passion, saving souls therewith. And therefore, we are co-redeemers in that sense. The Blessed Mother opened up the earth and showed the three shepherd children hell with souls in them, souls in hell. And she said, many souls are here because there are not enough people to pray for them. Now, what does that mean? That our prayers can save or lack thereof damn souls. That's co-redemption. Without our prayers, they're lost. Another example, the little flower in the convent of Lisieux was praying for a man who was about to be decapitated with the form of capital punishment of the day, which was guillotine. And all they had was a newspaper to find out what was going on. And she decided to offer up sacrifices and prayers to save this one murderer's soul who was unrepentant on the day of his death. And she offered to God her sufferings of tuberculosis and other things. And she asked God a sign that her prayers achieved their end. So she waited for the paper, she read it, and as his head was being placed on the gibbet before being decapitated, he laid hold of the priest's cross around his neck and kissed it 3 times. And she said that was a sign he was converted. That was because of her prayers. If she didn't pray, he probably would have gone to hell, even with the Passion of Christ. But our prayers, in addition to the Passion of Christ, can save souls. So we are co-redeemers in that sense.
Now, the following clip, I've shared this one with you before, but since some of you were still asking about this, I thought it doesn't hurt for us to revisit this again. And it's on those who commit suicide.
At the moment of death is the soul snatching, God's soul snatching, because in that moment, everything is revealed to the soul. It's a very august, solemn moment. We can't understand it now because we don't have the demons and the angels vying for our soul right now, which happens at the moment of death. And when they do that, all these internal visions, internal locutions start to happen inside of us that we never experienced in our life. We hear voices. We hear and see interiorly images that we don't see right now. At the moment of disillusionment, in seeing and in experiencing firsthand how much we, the Trinity, love the soul and do love it now, the soul feels so much sorrow that it repents for not having loved us. It recognizes our will as the beginning and completion of its life. And to offer satisfaction, it accepts its death to accomplish one act in our will, because without one act in our will, it cannot enter heaven. And then he adds, with the exception of the most perverted and obstinate, how many are saved at the moment of death by virtue of this entirely loving stratagem of ours, even if this means that they have to endure a long time in purgatory? This is why the moment of death is our daily soul snatching. It is the finding of the human creature who was lost. Okay, now, if a person commits suicide by jumping off a bridge or is under the influence of drugs, which mitigates their deliberation and therefore actions, it doesn't mean they're lost for eternity. Before the Second Vatican Council, I want to make sure I say this right. No, it wasn't before the Second Vatican Council. It was after the Second Vatican Council. A few years thereafter, the Church made a law that reversed its previous law. The previous law was no one who committed suicide could be buried in a Catholic cemetery. But then shortly after the Second Vatican Council, it allowed that. Why? And for good reason. Because only God sees what's going on inside a person when they take their life. Not everyone who commits suicide is lost. So Saint Jean Vianney, the patron of confessors, was approached by a desperate woman, a mother of a son who had killed himself. And she said, I have no more reason to live. Why is God keeping me here? I think my son is in hell. Now, this is at the time when late, 1700s, when people were thinking that suicides are a straight ticket to hell. So she was convinced her son's in hell. And he told her, I will pray. When he saw her again, he said, your son was saved. God revealed it to him that from the moment he jumped to the moment he died, he converted, he repented for what he had done. You see, sometimes an act of suicide is impulsive. It's not always premeditated. It's not planned in advance. And there's a lot of duress that accompanies it, and therefore lack of deliberation, lack of premeditation. And therefore, God sees these mitigating factors that we don't see. So here in a case like this with, Jean Vianney, who lived from like the 1700s to the 1800s, was in a time when suicide was considered taboo completely. It still is, but we understand now that some people make mistakes even at the moment of death like that, and God can save that soul even at the moment of death with their repentance. Yeah.
Well, we've finally reached the last clip in this compilation, and for this one, I want to share this with you about our Lord Jesus. Listen to this.
Jesus' humanity was assumed by his divinity. His humanity had a beginning, his divinity had no beginning, meaning his humanity is limited. St. Paul says in his letter to the Colossians, although he was in the form of God, he did not deem equality something to be grasped at, but rather lowered himself and took the form of a slave, being born in the likeness of men. Now, why did Paul use the word slave? Because of the limitations of the human nature he assumed, including ignorance. So, when the divine nature, including the divine intellect, memory, and will, incarnated itself in Mary's womb and assumed a human nature, including a human intellect, memory, and will, the eternal will, intellect, and memory of the divine nature was continuously informing the limited human intellect, memory, and will of the human nature. Therefore, for example, at the wedding feast of Cana, when Jesus is asked by Mary to do something because they have no more wine, that is, the guests, and the bride and the groom had no more wine at the wedding feast, Jesus says, "My hour has not yet come." What hour is that? For him to reveal himself as the Messiah. Up until now, nobody knew that Jesus was the Messiah. And he knew that once he did a public miracle, eyes would be drawn to him, and his ministry would begin as the Messiah. But then what does Mary say after Jesus says, "My hour has not yet come"? She turns to the waiter and says, "Do whatever he tells you." In that instant, the divine intellect informed the human intellect of Christ, "Now your time has come." Just a moment ago, he said, "My time has not yet come." But once Mary directed the waiter, he saw through Mary the will of God. And now he said, "Okay, I will perform my first public miracle, thereby initiating, jump-starting my public ministry as the Messiah." So there are occasions in the life of Christ where his human intellect had to be informed by the divine intellect. It wasn't all at once, it was progressively. And that's why Luke says he had to grow in his human nature, in age, wisdom, and knowledge. And even the letter to the Hebrews says he learned obedience through suffering. So this was a progression on his human level, not on the divine level. And some people go so far as to say, "Oh, Christ in his human nature didn't know he was God until he was 12. That's ridiculous. I mean, from the moment of conception, he was aware in his human intellect of his mission, his purpose, his divinity, and so forth. Thank you.
That will be all for the video this time. And as always, thank you so much for taking the time to be here again, and hopefully all of you have learned a lot from this video. Remember, if there's any feedback or suggestion, please let us know in the comments below. Anyway, if you like what we do and you'd like to support us, I left a link to our PayPal donation in the description box below, and from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for your continuous support, contributions, and prayers. And until the next one, thanks again for watching, and may God bless you.
There are two types of plenary indulgence: the one the church gives and the one that God gives through Faustina. And the one that God gives through Faustina is only on the first Sunday after Easter. The one the church gives can be received once a day, but it can only be given to yourself or to a deceased soul.